Welcome to Trump Wire, your trusted source for breaking headlines, global insights, and sharp analysis from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Good evening, I'm Chris Wallace. Tonight, we examine a story affecting millions, the fate of the American auto industry. The Trump administration's tariffs aim to protect U.S. jobs and revive manufacturing, promising a return to Detroit's glory days, but the reality? Far more complicated, and for many, far more painful. Instead of a renaissance, we saw rising costs for steel and aluminum, retaliatory tariffs, and economic uncertainty. Automakers faced tough choices, and the result was not revival, but retreat. As U.S. factories went quiet, Canada's assembly lines buzzed with new investment. With stable trade agreements and government incentives, Canada became a safe harbor for an industry in turmoil. Tonight, we'll explore how 7 major automakers navigated this turbulent period and why Canada is emerging as the new hub of North American auto manufacturing. Let's start with General Motors, once the symbol of American industrial might. Tariffs on steel and aluminum hit GM hard, adding $1 billion a year to costs. Suddenly, building cars in the U.S. was more expensive and exporting them was less profitable. The math didn't work. GM announced painful restructuring, closing plants in Detroit and Lordstown, Ohio. These closures devastated communities and became a symbol of broken promises. Meanwhile, GM shifted focus to Canada, investing heavily in Oshawa and Ingersoll, Ontario. Canadian plants once slated for closure were revived to build high-demand trucks. Capital and jobs flowed north, where trade policy was stable and incentives strong. In Ohio, a massive plant sat empty. In Ontario, workers built vehicles that once defined the American Midwest. GM wasn't abandoning North America, it was moving to where the climate was most favorable. This wasn't about a single model, it was a fundamental shift in strategy. By investing in Canada, GM saved on tariffs and gained access to global markets. The US put up walls and GM simply went around them. The result, American communities left behind, while Canada became the new center of GM's North American operations. The story of GM is a warning. Trade policy can have consequences far beyond its intentions. The promise of America First led to a migration of jobs and investment north, and GM's pivot was just the beginning. Ford, the quintessential American automaker, faced the same dilemma. Tariffs on steel and aluminum cost Ford $1 billion, forcing price hikes and tough decisions. Plans to import the Ford Focus Active from China were scrapped, too expensive under new tariffs. Instead of moving production to the US, Ford canceled the model entirely. No new American jobs were created. Meanwhile, Ford's Oakville, Ontario plant became even more critical. Producing vehicles in Canada allowed Ford to export globally without facing US trade barriers. Ford invested hundreds of millions in Canadian facilities, preparing for electric vehicles and future growth. The message was clear. Canada offered stability and opportunity. Ford scaled back in the US, but doubled down north of the border, not out of disloyalty, but necessity. The tariffs meant to protect American industry made Canada a more attractive place for Ford to do business. The cost of loyalty was high and Ford chose survival. Fiat Chrysler automobiles, with roots in both Italy and the US, faced a tangled web of challenges. Tariffs drove up costs for their most profitable vehicles, Ram trucks and Jeep SUVs. Retaliatory tariffs threatened exports, forcing FCA to rethink its entire North American strategy. U.S. investments became cautious and limited, while Canadian plants in Windsor and Brampton grew in importance. Canada's stable trade environment made it the logical place for new investment. FCA poured over $1 billion into Windsor, retooling for electric and hybrid vehicles. Canadian workers secured jobs for years, while U.S. plants faced uncertainty. The tariffs accelerated FCA's pivot north, making Canada the center for its next-generation vehicles. The money flowed to where it was safest, across the Detroit River. For FCA, Canada became the new hub of innovation and growth. The alliance survived, but the center of gravity shifted. Even Tesla, the face of American innovation, was hit hard by tariffs. Building cars in California became more expensive as tariffs raised the cost of batteries, electronics, and aluminum. Tesla faced a paradox. Foreign automakers could import finished EVs with lower tariffs than Tesla paid for parts. The company sought exemptions, but uncertainty slowed production and planning. Canada, with its rich resources and government support, became increasingly attractive. Reports surfaced of Tesla scouting Canadian sites for a new gigafactory. Tesla acquired a Canadian battery tech firm, laying groundwork for a northern expansion. The tariffs meant to help US companies instead push Tesla to diversify abroad. Canada's stable trade and resources offered a compelling alternative. The future of EV technology began to shift away from Silicon Valley. Tesla's story is a warning. Innovation follows opportunity, not borders. Tariffs risk driving America's most dynamic company north. Toyota, a Japanese giant with deep US roots, was caught in the tariff crossfire. Decades of investment in American plants were threatened by rising costs and policy uncertainty. Tariffs added hundreds of dollars to every US-built vehicle, hurting competitiveness. The looming threat of broader auto tariffs made future investment risky. Toyota's Canadian plants in Cambridge and Woodstock became more valuable than ever. The company invested over $1 billion to retool Canadian facilities for the next generation RAV4. By concentrating production in Canada, Toyota insulated itself from US volatility. The tariffs, meant to encourage US manufacturing, convinced Toyota to double down on Canada. The best-selling RAV4 and its hybrid technology shifted north. Toyota's vote of confidence went to Ontario, not Kentucky. Honda's American legacy was built in Ohio, Alabama, and Indiana. Tariffs raised costs by hundreds of millions, forcing tough choices: absorb losses or raise prices. The unpredictability of US policy made long-term investment risky. Honda's Alliston, Ontario plant became a strategic asset, an escape valve from American protectionism. Honda invested over $300 million, making Alliston the global lead for the next-generation CR-V. Engineering and manufacturing for a flagship SUV shifted to Canada. The message stability and open trade win investment. Honda's story is one of capital flight driven by policy. The tariffs meant to secure US leadership instead promoted Canada. The Heartland's future now follows Canada's lead. Rivian, a promising American EV startup, faced steep hurdles from tariffs. Lacking the resources of legacy automakers, every added cost threatened its survival. Tariffs on Chinese components made it harder to compete and raise capital. Canada's incentives, clean energy and raw materials became a tempting alternative. Rivian considered building its next plant in Canada to access global markets and avoid US trade barriers. Ultimately, it chose Georgia, but the fact Canada was a finalist speaks volumes. The tariff climate forced even new American innovators to look abroad. The policy meant to foster domestic growth risked driving it away. Tonight we've seen a clear pattern. Tariffs meant to protect American industry instead drove automakers north. From GM and Ford to Tesla and Rivian, companies followed stability and opportunity to Canada. Billions in investment and thousands of jobs shifted to Ontario, not Ohio or Michigan. The lead plants for best-selling vehicles are now Canadian. The infrastructure, jobs, and innovation have begun to move north. The question remains, can Detroit recover, or has Canada become the new home of North American auto manufacturing? The answer will shape the future of the industry and the continent.